Hey guys, Ryan Dement from Chasing Happiness Podcast. I hope you guys are having a great day. This week on the podcast, we have Claire Chandler. She's the president and founder of Talent Boost, but she also has something in common with me. She's a 25-year survivor of corporate America. Claire, welcome into the show.
Hey Ryan, thanks for having me. It's great to be here.
Awesome. So before we get into your journey, tell the listeners a little bit about your background.
Ooh, that's kind of a loaded question, right? So, as you sort of teed up, I am a corporate survivor. I spent the majority of my career in corporate America. After, by the way, swearing I was never going to go into corporate, but that's where the opportunities were. And a little over, actually, a little less than 11 years ago, back in 2011, I decided to go out and take my shot and enter the unknown waters of entrepreneurship. I left a job in the utility industry. I was VP of human resources. After swearing, I wasn't going to work in human resources either. So I really just need to stop swearing, apparently. And yeah, so 11 years later, I've started and run a thriving consulting business, and it's different every day, and I love every minute of it.
So before we get into your journey, how did you finally say enough was enough with corporate America? What triggered that?
Yeah. So it was 2011. It was the spring. I was VP of HR at that time. I had just recently been put into that role, so it was very much a learning journey for me. I don't come from an HR background. I actually started in more of a branding and communications background, and then spent about 3 years in our customer service call center
Mhm.
as head of customer relations. So I can relate to some of your pain in that regard. And then went into HR, worked there for a few years, and so I was in this new role, traveling all the time. Had literally had my entire office packed into a rolling suitcase because I was on the road like 3 weeks out of four, and I had a little bit of a health scare that the younger Claire would have ignored and said, "Oh, it's just adrenaline, and don't worry about it." And I did worry about it. I looked into it, and it led to a cancer diagnosis. And
Oh,
so,
wow.
yeah, and so that was, really eye opening to say the least, because I had to go from, operating at 150 miles an hour to literally coming to a screeching halt, delegating everything that I had on my professional plate to my very talented team, take a month off of work, do surgery, do recovery, do treatment, the whole bit. And it's interesting. You talk to anybody who's had a cancer diagnosis, and they will tell you that it does put your life into very stark relief. It kind of divides your life into before and after, and it really makes you understand truly that life is too short. And so, I did a lot of reflecting. I did a lot of healing, and I spent a lot of time in the silence, and I finally couldn't outrun that voice in my head that had been trying to ask me for far too long, are you doing what you're passionate about? And I finally had to acknowledge that the answer was no. And when you get an answer like that, you have to do something with that, right? And so I went through the rest of my medical leave and my recovery and all of that. Came back into work, gave my notice. We parted on great terms, and I had a pretty protracted leave because I didn't really know where I was going to go next. I just knew that I was done with corporate, and that wasn't really the hamster wheel that I
Mhm.
wanted to be on anymore.
A lot of people, and I say a lot because I seem to find them in my private practice, but they seem to have these clarity moments and tend to ignore them. And that's great that you didn't because one, your health, but two, finding what you're passionate about. It's amazing that we don't give ourselves more credit and just sit down and, as you say, sit in the silence and just figure out what we're doing and what we want to do. And it typically will come to you after a period of time, but you have to work through that process. And I bet you that was a daunting task, especially with what you had on your mind with your health. And then you're saying, wow, now I got to make a change and go out into that scary world of I gotta learn. My joke is corporate America didn't teach me how to fish. It taught me how to be fat and happy. And when I became an entrepreneur, I had to learn how to fish again. And it was a struggle.
Yeah. Well, and getting out of that corporate bubble also teaches you that you were probably fishing in the wrong pond to begin with,
Yes.
right?
Yes.
Yeah, and to your point about sitting in the silence, we are in a society where we have to intentionally give ourselves permission to do that because we are under constant pressure to be busy, to look busy, to produce, right? How often in the corporate world, and I'm sure your listeners who are still in corporate know the guilt you feel when you take a vacation, when you leave early because you want to spend time with your family, or God forbid you've got to go to a doctor's appointment, and somebody always cracks the joke, oh, half day.
Yep.
um Not so funny, right? So we have to give ourselves permission to sit in the silence. And I know for some people that's very scary because, like me, they knew there were voices in their head trying to ask them those really important spiritual questions, right? Because we were not put on this earth to live and operate in a box. And so many of us have convinced ourselves, well, work is supposed to be hard. You're not supposed to like your job, right? And it's just not true.
And you're supposed to work to 65 and then live your life afterwards.
Yeah, right. Right.
It's
Right.
it's sad that we've been conditioned or wired that way, and when you start thinking outside of that traditional thought, you're frowned upon, and it's very, um, I don't know how to say it. It's not to me, it doesn't bother me. It's like, okay, if you don't like how I think or what I do, I'm okay with it. But some people really take it to heart, and it's like they're afraid to step out of that fold, but they truly have something that great that they wanna go after, and they leave it on the table, and then they have regret, and that's just a
Ugh,
struggle.
it's the worst feeling in the world. When you are on your deathbed, you're not going to regret the things you tried. You're going to regret the things you didn't. And I truly believe that.
I had a prior guest on, and we'll get into your topic, but this was it. I've heard of this, I've not thought about it for myself, but I'm actually doing it because he gave me a template, and I'll share it with everybody if you want it too. He said, "The best way you're gonna know to find your passion is write your own obituary." And I was like, I
I
was
love
quiet
that.
too for a
I love
second,
that.
and I was like, "Oh, wow." And then he says, "Can I read a part of mine?" I'm like, "Okay." He says, "Every year I update it." And he
Wow.
said, "I just recently updated it." And he does, Ironman, races and all this other stuff, and the very first thing he does, and it clicked really fast, was he does not look at the starting point. He goes a couple days early and goes to each of the finishing points and saying,
Mm.
"Oh, that's what the finishing point looks like. That's what I'll be doing." And then works his way backwards. And it was just so cool, but the obituary piece was just over it was just over the top, and I was like, "Are you kidding me?" That
You
is
know,
just
he's that's so slightly morbid, but so brilliant because like he's a living, breathing example of the concept of starting with the end in mind. Like he's literally
correct.
starting with his end in mind. And I'm a big picture person, so like I work with my clients all the time on, sort of tell me where you want to get to, and then we'll worry about the steps you need to take to get there and what the gaps are, et cetera, et cetera. But you have to start with where you're heading. You have to start with where you want to end up. Um, so what a brave thing to do, though. Well, in addition to the triathlon, because that's just brave. I've gone to many triathlons as a spectator. Um, yeah, never actually done them myself. But I mean, what an amazing illustration of starting with the end in mind.
I think that just leads us into, exactly what you're doing. I mean, you're working, with clients that you're really trying to help them understand. And I know you're working with, venture capital in bigger backed companies and so forth to invest. The piece that I really like about what you're doing is you're really looking for that vision, the steps like we just talked about, but the other piece is you have the roadmap and you understand what you're gonna do, because ultimately, if you don't, you're gonna fail. And that's just a great piece of translation for entrepreneurship.
Yeah, absolutely. And for me, I mean, the approach that I follow and why I have started to gain some traction with the investment community is because for so long, um, venture capitalists, private equity investors, and then leaders of large companies have looked at what they've convinced themselves is the end goal, and they're
Mhm.
looking at the bottom line on a balance sheet. And don't get me wrong, that's important, right? Because if you're in a for-profit sort of an environment, you have to make money year over year, you have to do it in a predictable
Yep.
way, you've got to do it in a sustainable way. But the part that they always overlook is you don't do that by, just crunching down on efficiencies and engineering out processes, although those are important. You have to bring the people along with you. They have to be the right people. They have to be in the right roles. They have to have the right skills, certainly, but they also have to be motivated by the right things. They have to want to be there. They have to want to understand where it is that you're trying to get to. And they have to see their individual, um, how they individually contribute to making that happen. And the more you can align that with their own personal why, the more likely they are going to enthusiastically contribute, go above and beyond, do things the right way when no one is looking, right? And for far too long, these big titans of industry and these big investors had overlooked the people element. And the people element is so important in driving the profitability and the sustainability and the health of any business. So it's about time they stopped ignoring that.
The thing that I heard on your when I was listening to one of your prior podcasts that really caught my eye and really like honed in is you as the entrepreneur, the vision and so forth is great. And being the leader versus being the visionary, manager. I agree with all those. The piece that really just caught me was this. You have an entity, you have a business, and it's humming along, and you want to scale, and you need to know where you're going. But the why is huge, and I'll tell it to everybody till the cows come home, to the mountains, whatever. This is my 3rd business. My first 2 businesses failed because I didn't have a why. It was all about dollars, and you're correct. It's about the people. It's about, of course, you gotta watch the bottom line because you're for profit. But if you don't have a why and understand what you're trying to do, you'll never get there, and I think the person that was interviewing you was a construction guy, and I know that field very well because I'm in the affordable housing, sustainable housing business, and how he started was because he loved carpentry. Well, guess what? I started because I wanted people to be able to buy homes, but I didn't have that total why, and you had to figure that out before we could even drive a nail into a piece of wood, and it was a struggle for the first probably year to understand that why and where to go. And today we 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 reinvent ourselves on a daily basis, as I say, but now we've added another complexity of a nonprofit. And I'm trying to run a nonprofit like a for profit, and people tell me that's incorrect. But guess what? It's my business. I get to do that, but I have vision. I know where it's going to go. The end result is I just have to abide by the IRS code, which means if I show a profit at the end of the year, it has to be dispersed into some type of mechanism or some type of investment so I don't show a profit. That's it. Why
Right.
can't I run it like a for profit? Why does it have to be a nonprofit and lose money? That
Well, and
I don't get.
no, not at all, and I completely agree with you. We can tell horror stories all day long about the evils of corporate and for-profit companies, but obviously there are certain things that they are doing right. Right.
Mhm,
One of them is they've got structure, they've got discipline. Most of them.
mhm,
So apply what works in the for-profit environment to your nonprofit, because I think too often the nonprofits are all about leading with their heart, and
yes.
while that's motivating, that's not necessarily practical from a business perspective, because if you cannot function year over year, then all the great work that you are trying to bring to the world is going to fail, right? Um,
Yes.
so yeah, I think you can absolutely translate some of the good things, some of the best practices, some of the lessons learned from a for-profit environment and bring it over to nonprofit.
So I've got to ask a question because this is going to divert and we're going to go down a rabbit hole.
Love it.
So
Do it.
venture capital, the investment world, I've been approached several times, for our for profit because we have a real estate investment fund that we do through, and then they find out we have a nonprofit and they're like, oh, we want to get into a nonprofit too, and I'm like, let me think. You are a VC or some type of investor. You need to understand you're not turning a profit on this. And some of these individuals are like, oh no, we're just going to do it before the optics, and I'm like, hmm. don't know if you're the right person for me or not, because this is not an optics thing. This is about serving the communities that we're in to be able to help them with services that otherwise they couldn't attain. And it's just amazing to hear these guys say, "You're turning away my money?" Yes, I am actually.
And I think that the nonprofit leaders like yourself get the fact that you need to fiercely defend the why once you've gotten
Mhm.
clarity around what that purpose is. And I think, that's a lesson for the for-profit leaders and the investment community to really sit up and pay attention to. You have to lead with a why. You have to understand your purpose. Otherwise, you're never going to get the right people to join you and contribute, and let alone stay and help you to grow and to succeed and all those sorts of things. But you also have to fiercely defend it. So, we talk a lot about, before I was in HR, I was in more of a branding and communications type of a function. And, you talk about the brand, you talk about employees being brand ambassadors, you talk about defending the brand, but the brand is so much more than just your logo and your font and, your signage on the door, right? It's about, what do we truly believe we were put in place to achieve, and how are we going to do that day in and day out with a discipline and a focus and a and a clarity of thought and of decision and of action. And so that's where leaders can take the lessons from the nonprofit side of the house to say they get it, because they lead with their heart, they lead with their why, and they fiercely defend what it is that they are trying to do and contribute in the world. And us for-profit folks can do that as well.
So I have to ask another question. Have you ever experienced somebody that's overbaked their why?
Okay, so clarify what you mean by that.
Overbaked means they're leading so much with the why to where they forget the other aspects of the business. I mean, like you said, they're leading with their heart, but it's over leading.
Yeah, unfortunately, I have, and what tends to happen is the smaller companies, the startup companies, fall victim to this. So you have very likely seen that the more entrepreneurial leaders are extremely visionary. They
Mhm.
are values driven. They get the fact that they want to surround themselves with a small cadre of people who get it, who can contribute. But typically, what happens in my experience, and I've had a couple of clients that unfortunately fell prey to this. They're so visionary and they're so values driven and they're so big picture that they lack the focus, the discipline, and quite honestly, the stomach to make the day to day harder decisions, especially as it relates to people, right? So we all want to be the good guy when we are the visionary, when we're the founder, when we're the CEO, and we say, I've got this idea and I
Mhm.
want to build a company around it. And I know that I can't do it all on my own. So I have to bring in some people around me. Some of those people are not going to be the right fit. It just works out that way. And there are things you can do to better predict whether they're the right fit or not. But invariably somebody gets through the fence, right? And somebody is not the right fit. Or because you're so values driven but you're not disciplined about defending your why, they start to stray. And you don't notice it, or a lot of times, a CEO like that will tell me, well, they're adults, they'll figure it out, they'll resolve, they'll come back to center. The more you tolerate, right, the bad behavior or the values violations or underperformance because they're just a good person,
Mhm.
the more your little company is going to go off the rails. And what I always tell founders and leaders of smaller companies is the ripple effect of a bad decision, a poor hire, or a delay in making a decision about the talent that you've got on your team is far greater in a small company than in a large corporate behemoth that has more fat, quite honestly, to absorb a bad employee, an ill-fitting hire, underperformance, bad behavior, etc. It's those smaller companies that absolutely have to get the fit right. Absolutely have to get the fit right. They have to get their why completely clarified. And then they have to have the right people around them and keep defending that why and defending behavior that aligns with that versus detracts from it.
I've noticed a lot of founders that I talk to or interact with. They are the visionary, and they kind of stay in that realm. And then when they come talk to me, they're like, "You're not a visionary." No, I'm an operator. I mean, that's just who I am and where I'm at. Am I going to go down 10 steps down the road? Probably not. I'm more like 3 to 5 because I'm looking at what can we do and what can't we do. But I have a business partner that I joke is my Steve Jobs, and I'm Steve Wozniak, and I have to go get it done. So when we have our weekly meetings, he has 12 or 15 things that he thinks that we can go do, and I say no, 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 no. Okay, we'll look at that one. And he always gets angry at me because I know realistically, if we're going to keep vision going and the why going and continue to produce what we produce, I can't take on 15 tasks. I could
Yeah.
hire all the people to the heart's content. Doesn't work. You have to find focus and clarity. And I have to just digress. Corporate America really kind of taught me that is because when I was trying to run call centers, 12 to 1500 headcount, you didn't have I didn't have any type of margin of error to where I could let people slide, especially I was in collections.
Yeah.
I had a daily number, monthly number, quarterly, annually. I had to hit a number. So if I didn't have the right people in place, I had the mechanisms to coach them up or coach them out. And that just stuck with me. And it is a human level, but at the same time, it's an end result. And I've over the years of being an entrepreneur, I've evolved. I think it's more about the person, but there also has to be an end result, like you said, accountability and understanding the why and staying there. Otherwise, nothing happens.
So kudos to you, first of all, for recognizing in yourself that you are first and foremost an operator, and also then leaning into the importance of having a business partner to balance you out.
Hmm.
Um, these sort of visionary founders and CEOs and small company business leaders that we talk about, who are super values driven, and as you sort of suspected, they're overbaked on their why. They're
Hmm.
actually overbaked on their ego. And what I mean by that
Oh.
is they're not necessarily narcissistic, but they are very fragile in terms of, well, wait a minute, I started this company, or I'm the founder, or I'm the head. I don't want to share that title with anyone else, right? I want to be the guy or the gal. And too often they make that mistake and they over index on their own vision and their own values to the detriment of the rest of the company, because the rest of the people are going, all the good performers are saying, why is this person still allowed to act like they are? Why are they underperforming? Why are they acting, behaving badly? And this person isn't addressing it. Well, this person doesn't have the capacity to do it. He certainly feels the pain of the bad behavior, but he doesn't know how to follow through on having those hard conversations. And some people just flat out don't have that capacity. What's interesting is we all kind of process the information about the environment around us through these three main filters, right? The sort of the big picture, right? How readily and how naturally do we see
Hmm.
how things fit into the whole and the grand plan? The second filter is how easily do to any given problem, very tactical, very sort of problem solving oriented. Sounds like that's kind of your genius zone. And the third filter is empathy, right? So
Yep.
how readily or how naturally or how instinctively do we read the room and understand the impact of decisions or lack of decisions on the people that that's going to affect? And it's the very rare leader, founder, entrepreneur, venture capitalist who's a genius in all three filters. And so the trick is to be really, really aware, self aware of which one of those is your genius zone, or even if
Hmm.
there are which ones those are, and bring somebody into your inner circle, whether that's a business partner, an advisor, a second in command, what have you, who balances you out by being a genius in that other one or two filters, right? And if you need three to sort of complete that trifecta, that's great. But it's really critical, especially in these smaller companies where, again, that ripple effect is so big
Yes.
of a bad decision, to make sure that you are making decisions by taking in all the right information through all three of those lenses.
And that's kind of the whole process we've done. We're going on year 9 now, and we're revolving. We've updated our board just recently, and then we've up so last year is when we started the nonprofit. So we're very young in the nonprofit stage, and we're just filling out our board there. And the individuals that are on the board, I'm the only operator. And
There you go.
that's but you know what? The board needs to have another operator. And and I say this because the other individuals have visionary. They also have started up their own companies. I have a person that actually has nonprofit experience as I think they call him managing director or something to that extent. So he did that for almost 5 years. So he has that experience. But at the same time, day-to-day operations is going to be on to somebody else. It's not going to be me because I don't have the bandwidth and I understand that. So we need to have somebody that understands operations and we haven't got there yet. And that's what I'm focused on is how do I transition that piece of the business over to somebody that actually has that mindset that understands that because the other pieces are in place like you said we have visionary we have somebody that understands the why and there's a few other people on the board that have empathy and the people piece so I feel like I can jump in and help in those different areas but ultimately I don't want to be the day-to-day operator.
And it's so important to get that balance right, right? So you being the only one who's sort of the practical thinker, the operator, person in the room, because the other 9 or 10 people in that board, surrounding you don't have that hat as their genius
Hmm.
zone, you can very often get drowned out or overwhelmed, right? If you're the only
Yes.
one who's thinking through that lens, so to speak, as your primary mode of operating.
Yes.
So yeah, it's super important to get that balance right. So if there's only 3 of you, make sure there's somebody who's got a genius zone in each of these 3 filters. If there's 10 of you, make sure that the proportions are correct. And there are ways that you can kind of quantify, at an individual level, which one of those genius zones they have, so that you're not sort of going by gut feel. Which I think is another sort of sin of us entrepreneurs, right? We tend to make a lot of decisions just based on our gut, what feels right, what feels true, versus understanding we can measure more things than we think we can, and it doesn't necessarily slow us down. It actually makes us more confident and clearer in the decisions that we make.
In the add on to that, and also taking the time and trying to I say vet the person out. It's really what it is I wanna get to know them, and it's not just sitting down breaking bread. It's more understanding their thought process, where they're at, and then just having daily contact or conversations, because that ultimately will tell me where that person's thoughts are and where we're going, and because back to corporate America, when I'm managing 1,500 headcount, I had 3 direct reports. So I need to make sure that I'm in touch with my 3 direct reports, but I did something a little different. People didn't like it because I was the zebra, I was the ugly duckling. So when I was in collections, because I started door-to-door collections way back in the day, I knocked on doors and asked people for the money because they were past due.
Yeah.
I would go out on the floor and sit with my collectors and listen to calls and take over calls from them and help them. And my direct reports thought that was, you know, I basically interfering with what they were doing. And I said, "No, it's not. I'm actually understanding what's going on the front line so I can better help you guys." And so that started rolling a ball to where these guys started going out on the floor and doing the exact same thing. And it just started a momentum to where we started changing how things happen. Because when I took over the department, they were not hitting their goals. They were missing their goals. This was student loan collections, and this is back in the day. This
Mm.
is FELP. I don't know if you're familiar. It's federally funded education loan program. Bush put it out a long time ago, but it's a runoff portfolio. It's still out there. But anyhow, I could talk all day on that one. I still consult on that stuff. It's
Yeah.
fun.
What I,
Um,
what I love about what you did, though, because on the surface, your employees, or initially, they kind of receive that as micromanaging, right? And we all have worked for micromanagers. And if you ever do
yep.
interviews with candidates and you say, "What type of management do you function under best?" The first thing they always say is, "Well, I don't like to be micromanaged." Well, who does, right? But what's great is you transcended beyond that, because you told them why it was so important that you did what you did. And to come back to this little 3-letter word why that you started this conversation around, it is so important at the ground level as it is at the visionary level, right?
Hmm.
Back when I was in corporate and I was managing a team, I had this post-it note over my monitor in my office, and it said, "Tell them why." And it was a simple little note, but it was a constant reminder for me, not just to tell people what I wanted them to do, but why it mattered. Your people are so hungry for that. They want to understand why their individual role or an individual task or an individual day matters in the grand scheme of things. They want to not just feel like a cog in the wheel, right? They want to understand that the contribution that they make makes a difference, even if it's little. And it takes 3 to 5 extra seconds to explain the why. But as you saw firsthand, it made all the difference, and then they got it.
Yeah, and it took time, but it's a change of mindset, and that's that's kind of where I'm at with the nonprofit is I'm changing that mindset. I mean, the individuals that we have on the board today is like, "Oh yeah, we get that." But then when I'm competing against other nonprofits for maybe for federal funds or state funds or whatever the case is, they're like, "You can't run for profit." And it's like it just becomes a whole conversation piece, and I actually love it because I love to hear their thought process because then I know what I'm up against when I'm going through that grant process. It's fun for me. I enjoy it. I I I love opposing views because I get to understand what that other person is thinking. Doesn't mean that I dislike them. I just enjoy it, and it becomes more of a learning experience for me because I can always learn from somebody. Like today, we're having conversations. My brain's already going on a bunch of stuff on more aspects of why. Can we be more focused on why and drill down even further? Yes. How do I
Yeah,
get there? I
well,
don't know yet.
no, and that's yet another reason it's so important to bring people into the room who have different ways of viewing the world and don't just think and look and act and believe the same way that you do, right?
Mhm.
We learn more from opposing views and from different perspectives than we do from people who sit around a room and yes you to death. And some leaders, that's what they demand, right? They want yes men. They want people that just validate them. And you can always tell a narcissist by those who need to be flattered every single day of the week. Give me a leader any day of the week who promotes, surrounding themselves with people who respectfully disagree with them, debate with them, challenge their thinking. And you're going to see how successful that company is over one that's led by someone who just demands sycophants, because that is not going to advance your business.
And it's amazing once you get those individuals in a room and you can start having those healthy conversations back and forth, like you said, it promotes the business and it continues to grow. But then you have that why and it drills down to those individuals that are further down the chain and they now are just not there for a paycheck. They're actually part of that vision. They're part of the why. They're part of where it's going. And it's to me, it's rewarding because the end result is a product that is second to none. And what we put out is we're all brand ambassadors. And that's huge because it's prideful, and,
Absolutely.
I can still remember 10 years ago when we delivered our first house. I cried on television because, like, so much work went into that first house, and so many things went wrong because I didn't have everybody lined up, and I didn't have everybody in the right place, and it took a lot of time, but we put out a quality product, and that family loved it, and
Yeah.
that was my why.
It's beautiful when you can see and witness and feel the impact of what you were put on this earth to do and what you have built a business around in its purpose, and when you can see the tangible outcome of that in the face of a family, right, as an example, or in the face of
Mhm.
a customer. And it doesn't always have to be, the physical act of handing the keys to a house to a family. All of us, regardless of what business or industry you are in, what your why is, the clearer you are around that why and the more it is deeply personal to you, the easier it's going to be to attract the right people to you, because then you can make those connections for them. But the more you're going to get to those moments where either literally or figuratively cry on camera when
Mhm.
you witness the impact of what you've done, because it matters. It matters.
So how does that and we can wrap back around and keep on going, but how does that work with your clients when you're working with, VC and in the investment community? Can they relate to that?
Not all of them can relate to that. It's a great question. There's people listening to this, and I'm sure you're thinking it too. You're like, really, the investment community, like they're all just out for a return on their investment. And at the end of the day, they are all out for a return on their investment.
Of course.
But the ones who are starting to get it, I have conversations with private equity investors all the time, and they will say to me, we bought this business. And I kind of have them tell me why did you buy this business? Well, they look really good on paper. They've had a good track record, and we can see some immediate interventions we can do, right,
Mhm.
to kind of get them more efficient, to expand in a new market, et cetera, et cetera. And okay, so your growth strategy is sound. Our growth strategy is brilliant. Super. Have you met any resistance yet? They're like, all we meet is resistance. Okay, why is that? Well, the first thing we wanted to do was put them on our payroll system. They always go after the payroll system first. And these people lost their ever loving minds because, it was change. And so what's interesting is they all say that their growth strategy is brilliant. Their value creation plan, right? Whatever they call it. And they all run into the same problem, which is this notion of cultural resistance.
Hmm.
Part of the problem is the way that the system is set up is when you acquire a company, you can only talk to the head of that company. Maybe you can talk to some of the top leaders if they are brought into the conversation, but more often than not, you have very limited access to the rest of the people. So you have a very limited or non-existent ability to measure how many of the people that you have are the right people. What is that depth of talent, and what is the flat out capacity to achieve that growth strategy in the first place? And again, it all comes back to people, right? And again, it comes back to how many people do you have with the capacity for big picture and having a plan? How many do you have with the capacity for empathy? How many have the capacity for, tactical, actual problem solving and seeing solutions? And if you don't measure that and you don't even take that into account, don't be surprised when those are the first things that bubble up and get in the way of your growth strategy. And so the investors who get it, which unfortunately of the big ocean of investors, there's a
Hmm.
very, 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 very small fraction of them that are getting it. They get that the people are the absolute fundamental mission critical component to the growth strategy, right? It's not the founder. It's not, the person selling the company, because typically they're on an exit path anyway. It's
Yes.
everybody else in the organization. And so when I get to those who get it, who understand not the frustration that their growth strategy is meeting cultural resistance, but that the key to overcoming that and getting the growth strategy on track is to win over the people,
Hmm.
then we get to work. And then we say, okay, well, let's go in there and let's actually kind of measure what we've got to work with. Let's really pull apart your growth strategy and talk about it and unpack it with at least the leadership team so they can understand again the why. Because if you just roll in there with your growth strategy and your balance sheet, it doesn't matter how much money you put behind a business, right? It's sort of like the analogy of the lottery winner, right?
Yes.
You can hand somebody who's never seen that kind of wealth $100 million, and they're going to be worse than broke a year later.
Yes.
So, just throwing money at a business without bringing them along and helping them to understand why you specifically as an investor and an acquirer are going to help them get to the next level, you're doomed for failure. And so, the more enlightened of the investors are starting to get that, they're starting to see that, and are leaning into this conversation more and more, because they understand that without the people, even if we change them all out and got new ones, if they don't buy into where you're trying to grow, they are not going to help you get there, and you sure as hell can't get there on your own.
And your investment is down the toilet tubes.
Absolutely.
It's just amazing because I know when I first started the business, I was out pitching on my own. Before I met my business partner, I was out pitching on my own. I think I had 50 or 60 no's. And I just really thought about the dog and pony show and the pitch deck and everything. And I'm like, why am I doing this? We got to do something a little different and a little more conventional, because ultimately no one understood the affordable housing space, and people think,
Mm,
oh, you can't make any money. It's like, if you partner with the right individuals, when I say individuals, cities, counties, states, they have land and you can acquire it for dirt cheap. Um, and you get to build something that you get to be proud of and then allow people to become homeowners. And there's so many paths to go that they did not see that. They only saw that, oh, I can't make 75 or 80%. And I'm like, well, what's 25 to 40% return still? Is that not
right.
healthy enough? And that just led me keep on thinking and thinking and thinking. And then I went down a path of, I'm just going to go out and start reaching out to friends and family and just start and see where that goes. My parents were already invested because they were on my board already. But then a couple of family friends came along and they're like, we see your why. We understand that. Let me introduce you to some other people. And that just kind of started opening the door. But that whole thought process is bringing the people along and understanding that whole piece is huge, because ultimately, it, someone like I think you said on your podcast with this construction guy is, you can have all the money in the world, but that doesn't solve your problem of being able to scale and grow. I mean, and I know both sides, having no money and can't scale, and then having money and not having processes in place to be able to scale. And that's huge because if you're
Yeah.
not prepared for it, you could give me $20 million and I'll piss it away. And
Well,
it's
and that's
not worth
exactly
it.
right. That's exactly right, because people have to understand what to do with that influx of money.
Correct.
And it's the investors who make that calculation error, and it's the companies looking for that investment that make that
Hmm.
error. They think, well, we could get to the next level if only we had X million dollars. And if you don't have the capacity and you don't have that depth of talent and depth of buy-in, again, to the why you want to grow versus we were doing just fine, why would you mess this up? Then yeah, then you're pretty much pissing away that money rather than spending it in the right places and in the right way, right? And we talk about the key to your success, your business's livelihood, and your ability to grow and scale always comes back to the people. But as you were experiencing with getting your 50 no's, you have to find the right people, right?
Hmm.
And the way that you find the right people, the way that you bring them in, and the way that you retain them is by making a connection for them, which is exactly what you just described. You have to be able to connect a person's individual why, what motivates them uniquely, to how it relates to the company's why, the growth strategy, the value creation plan, whether you're on the investor side or you're the founder, the leader, the business owner. You have to make that connection for individual people. And some people hear that and they go, that sounds like a lot of work. And it might be, right? But if you engage with your people and you understand truly what motivates them, and by the way, you can measure that too, just like you can measure, what somebody's genius zone is, you can actually measure what motivates someone individually. So do that quick work because it doesn't take that long. And then understand what motivates an individual person and then make that connection for them. Just pull that thread and then get out of their way, right?
Hmm.
Fiercely defend your why, make sure it's crystal clear, get the right people in there to fill any gaps that you might have, show them the connection between their individual role and tasks and what you ask them to do and why that matters. Again, tell them why, and remove roadblocks. And then your only problem is going to be you're growing at such a clip, like you can't keep up with demand. Well, it's a good problem to have. But if you have the
That's a
right
big problem.
people and they're engaged and they're motivated and they're contributing and they're all acting like owners, then you bring them into that process too, because that's a great problem to solve.
That is a very great problem, and it makes life so much easier too. I mean, it's just night and day. And when you give that why, it's huge. So, Claire, this has been a wonderful conversation. So, how can everyone get a hold of you if they'd like to reach out to you and maybe have them on a podcast or maybe that you consult with their business?
I would love that. So the easiest way to get a hold of me is to either go to my website, which is talentboost.net.
Okay.
You can learn more about my business, a little bit more about me. And those in your audience, if you don't mind, I'd love to give them a free gift.
Sure.
If they go to talentboost.net/growth, the word growth, if they are business owners or leaders or even investors who are looking to grow and they're not sure whether they're ready to grow, there is a growth readiness assessment. It's a free ebook. They can go there, they can download it, they can apply it immediately. And if they've got questions or anything, there are ways on that website to reach out to me. I'd love to have a conversation and see how I can help you.
I will also link it in the show notes so we have that there so people can actually see that. Claire, it's been great. Thank you very much for coming on. I know we could kept on going for an hour or so, but I don't think everybody wants to hear my voice for that long.
Oh, I don't know about that. Let's just keep going. No, it's been
Thank
great.
you.
I appreciate the conversation.
Thank you for coming on.
Appreciate it.
Uh-huh.